Can a man find grace in rendition after mass incarceration? In this show, we're going to explore the perils of the penal system that now exists in modern America. And we're going to chop up some critical game with my homeboy and high school friend that got caught up in the system like so many young men do. We're going to talk about how prison life impacted his psyche, mind, and spirit. And we're going to talk about faith and how faith more or less transformed these two men. The second guest will be Dr. Johnny Vega, who was a kingpin coming out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, back in the 90s. He's going to talk about how he found grace and redemption on the other side. As you know, Black men are incarcerated at a rate higher than any other ethnic group. And because of this disparity, a lot of our men are more or less being impacted. And also the families are being impacted because we don't have the power to process our young men in order and on how to be men. And listen, I get it. Some of you are saying that maybe they shouldn't have committed the crime. But that's not the point. The point is men of color are incarcerated and were incarcerated at higher rates based on petty crimes from the past. And the crime bill that was enacted in the past did a tremendous impact not only to Black men's psyche, but also to the Black community. I want you to sit back and enjoy this show as Brother Dr. Johnny Vega will be chopping up some critical game. And one of my former high school classmates that was a quarterback when I was in school, Brother Avery Bond. So I want you to enjoy this show. And I want you to let these things sink inside your heart and your mind. And I want you to remember this. If it ain't seven, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it ain't right. As you know, that family is one of the key or one of the 7 principles in order for a man to be optimized. So I want you to enjoy this show, and I want you to take notes because this is going to be critical to the psycho development of Black men in America. Be well.
For having me on the show. It's an honor to be here, Mr. Smalls.
No
Avery,
doubt.
pleasure to meet you, brother. So a little bit about myself. Like you said, I'm an ex-drug dealer, ex-gang member. I was a Latin king for 20 years. Actually, my father, right now, he's doing 4 life sentences in Denver. My father was responsible for bringing Latin kings from Chicago to New York City in the early 90s. His name's King Blood. That's my biological father. So I was born into the gang life. So as I got to about 13, 14 years old, before that I was a good kid, played sports, but I was always attracted to the street lifestyle. And then being who my father was, at the age of 13, I started experimenting with weed, started smoking marijuana, and then as the smoking got more intense, I started hustling. So at the age of 14, I was selling weed, but I've always been the type, and you know how us Leos are, we got to go hard with everything we do.
Throw your L up, throw your L up, throw it up. We're in the circle of fire. You know, my man is the Aries, you know, and you notice the paradox. You got the ram and you got the lion. We both are fiery and we're very powerful. And you know, when you look at the ram and when you look at the lion, the ram symbolizes atonement, but the lion symbolizes dominion and eternity. So it's quite, ironic that we have, 2 powerful and passionate men that will continue to share their story. So go ahead, keep talking. I didn't mean to.
So as I got older, by the time I was 18, put it this way, they used to call me the one-stop shop. I grew up in a small town called Lancaster, Pennsylvania, originally from New York City. Right. And by the time I was 18 years old, I was selling heroin, crack, coke, guns, weed, pills, basically whatever I can get my hands on to make a profit illegally. I was doing it. So as time went on, 20 years old, actually a sophomore in college, I was leading a double life for a long time. So I was a sophomore in college, but I was still doing my thing. A business opportunity came up to open up a club. So I opened up a club called The Oz. 20 years old, not even legally allowed to drink yet. And, I opened up this club making about $10,000, $15,000 a week off of drugs, plus the club. And then one day as I was sitting at VIP, I heard this big boom. And they kicked in the doors, they came in through the windows. and they were dressed in black with masks on, and all I heard was, "Where's Johnny Vega? Where's Johnny Vega?" So as they were approaching me, my security, who was also Latin King, picked me up because I was drunk as a skunk. It was about 3:00 in the morning. I was lit. So they picked me up. Feds came in through the front door. My security took me through the back door, threw me in the back of the car, and took off. And that's when my life on the run from the federal government began. I was on the run for about 6 months. Actually got away from them one more time before I eventually got caught. When I eventually got caught, they locked me up. I was in county prison for 11 months with no charges. They basically let me sit, and my lawyer called me. He said, "Look, if they don't charge you with something within a year, they gotta let you go." So I said, "Cool, I'm about to go home." I was happy, that was before Christ, before I got saved. So at that time, I was like, I'm ready to go back home and get it on and popping again, if you know what I mean. So one day as I'm sitting in my cell, I get a letter in the mail. "Vega, you got mail." You know how it is, baby. So I got the mail, opened that thing up, and it said United States government versus Johnny Vega. I said, "Oh,
wow."
Said, "Oh." I never forget it. My cellie was like, "Oh, brother, you in trouble." I said, "Yeah, I think I'm in trouble." So I called my lawyer. My lawyer had gotten the same letter in the mail. He said, "I'm on my way up to see you, so we can discuss your options." He came up. The first option he gave me, he said, "Look, I can have you home by tomorrow." I said, "What do I got to do?" He said, "You got to give everybody up." I said, "Ooh." Now, remind you who my dad is. My dad is basically the #1 Latin king in the United States. So I couldn't do it. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't do it. I knew if I did do that, my life would be in danger. My family, he knows he knows where my mom lives, my grandma. Like, basically, I would put my whole family in danger. So I said, that's not an option. And I'll never forget it. My lawyer said, "All right, tough guy." And so I said, "What's my other option?" He said, we can go to trial. He said, "But if we go to trial, federal government got a 98.7 conviction rate. 98.7 conviction rate. So basically, if we go to trial, we're gonna lose." I said, "If we lose, how much time am I gonna get?" He said, 25 years. I said, and it blows my mind, because if I'd have went to trial and blew trial, I've been home 12 years. This happened in 2001. I'd be coming home right now. Crazy. So, I said, "What's my last option?" He said, "Look, you can take 120 months. I said, 120 months? Because, you don't think you can relate to this. When you hear months, it's like, months? What do you mean months? Like, I'm so used to my boys doing 2 to 4s and 4 to 8s and 10 to 20s. He said 120 months. So at first, it didn't sound like a lot of time. But then he was like, "I'll have you home by the time you're 30. I said, mind you, I just turned 21.
Wow.
So I said,
wow.
"Man." So he said, "Look, I work for you. You pay me. I'll do whatever you want. Take a day or two to think about it, and get back to me." So I said, "Cool." So everybody knows. Mind you, I'm in the county for 11 months, so everybody basically knows what's going on in my case. And that's the dude from Lancaster that was selling drugs, and he was a Latin king. So I'm walking back to the cell with the Diddy bop, with the stroll, like I got everything under control, like I'm Mr. Tough Guy. What do you think I did once that cell door closed?
You had an Apostle Paul experience.
I did. And it's crazy that you keep on mentioning that, because that's exactly what happened to me. As soon as that cell door closed, boom, I started crying.
Wow.
I started crying like a baby. Like,
so it sounds like, right, go ahead, brother. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'm there crying, just wondering, contemplating the rest of my life and the things I've done. And I cried for a little bit, and I never forget, my cellie said, "Man, you gonna be all right." And excuse my language, I'm allowed to curse a little bit, right?
No, you're okay. Yeah, go ahead, bro.
So I said, "Shut the fuck up, pussy. I'm about to do 9 years in jail." Like, and he rolled over and he got quiet. And then after I kind of gathered myself a little bit, I got on my knees. I got on my knees in that 12 by 12 cell, and I started praying.
Wow.
And I said, Lord, because like I said, I was leading a double life. I was going to church every Sunday just to please my mom. And every time I would go to church, I would cry like crazy. And my mom kept on telling me, that's the Holy Spirit convicting you. You ain't living right. Boom. But I would get out of church and there'd be a blunt in my ashtray. I'd spark it up and, hit the block right after church. So I prayed and I felt this peace come over me. And I said, Lord, and I asked God to forgive me. I asked God to forgive me for all the drugs I sold. I asked God to forgive me for hurting my family and my loved ones. And then I made a deal with God. And I said, God, if you get me through these next 9 years, I will serve you for the rest of my life. And not only will I serve you for the rest of my life, when I get home, I'm gonna make sure these young people and adults as well do not make the same mistakes that I made.
Right.
So I felt a peace come over, and I just like you said, I had an Apostle Paul moment. God stopped me in my tracks and said, Johnny, why are you persecuted?
Wow.
And that's when I asked for forgiveness, and that's when I went from Johnny Cash to back to Johnny Vega, and I began to renew my mind, and I began to work on myself spiritually, mentally, and physically. I went back to school as soon as I hit the feds. I got a couple of degrees, and I made it through those 9 years, and I held on to that promise that I made God. And as soon as I came home, I hit the ground running. I came home 2008. Got my doctorate in 2015. Opened up several mentoring programs in different schools, in different cities. Became a motivational speaker. Before the pandemic hit, I was all over the country speaking to kids. And here I am today with Mr. Small and Mr. Avery. You know what I mean? So, God is good and everything happens for a reason. And in a way, I thank God that I got locked up, because the lifestyle I was living, there was only two roads I was headed down. It was either jail or death. And I thank God that He chose jail for me, because I'm here living to tell my testimony about it.
Before we start, Avery, so it sounds like to me you had a point of grace experience, and
right.
And as we articulated earlier, a lot of young men actually get caught up in some of the negative ravages of gang life,
right,
and illegal activity, because they don't feel like they've been heard more or less in their community. Right. And as you're passionate as a motivational speaker about trying to change some of the deleterious impacts in the communities, I'm equally passionate as a clinician and also as a Black man about trying to implement policies and things that can increase the mobility of Black boys and Black men and brown boys. And so, you grew up, sounds like you grew up in an intact family. Is that safe to say? Did you grow up with a father?
My father was, like I said, the number one Latin king. And I've seen things when I was a kid that no kid should see.
Right.
Like, this man was chopping people up, putting them in the bathtub and pouring acid in the bathtub, and I'm watching what used to be a person going down the drain.
Oh wow!
Like I said, he's doing 4 life sentences in Denver for crimes that he was sending hits out from jail. So you can look him up. They got documentaries about him and everything. So my childhood was a little messed up, to say the least.
So Avery, Johnny talks about his point of grace experience, and Johnny, to tell you about Avery. Now, Avery and I went to high school together. I played basketball. He was a quarterback.
Right.
I think he led that 1991 team to, I think it was 8-3. So he was a star at Berkeley as related to athletics. But Avery, I want you to talk about your history, your point of grace experience, and how you felt like you had to do what you did. So I want you to talk about that.
Well, in all actuality, prior to me starting, I sold drugs in high school. I thought I sold drugs in high school. It's pretty easy to do. My father was a high school coach, so I was kind of popular with everybody. So and I know how to relate to people. So for me to sell drugs at that time was kind of easy. People like dealing with me and stuff. So it was all cool. As I graduated from high school, my father's intention was for me to go to school, of course. I started out in college, community college for a little while, and eventually I was working, selling drugs, and I was going to class in school. And the worst decision I ever made was I woke up in class one day. I was asleep. They left me in the classroom asleep because I was working nights and selling. I was never getting no rest. And at that point, I made up my mind. So you know what? I ain't going back to school. I'm gonna keep selling drugs. And that's what I did. I kept selling drugs. Of course, you know, I grew up in a Christian faith home. I always went to church all through high school. I went to church. I was an usher, and I really enjoyed it. As I got older and continued to sell drugs, I was selling drugs in the early 90s. I committed my life to Christ at one point, around 96. 96, my grandmother died, and that was a very life-changing experience for me when she passed away. And at that point, I made up my mind that something had to change. I didn't stop selling drugs at that moment, but probably a few months later, I eventually started selling drugs. And I committed my life to Christ one Sunday in church, and I was going to church and everything. And everything was going great. The one downfall of my being in Christ at that early age, I was in my early 20s. I didn't have any Christian friends to hang out with. So I was still hanging out with my cousins and stuff. We weren't doing nothing illegal, but they weren't big inspirations to me as far as pushing me to stay in Christ. You know, they kind of still want me to hang out with them and just hang out and stuff, which I did, trying to fight it. But eventually, that temptation of just still hanging out and stuff got the best of me, and I started back selling drugs. And when I started back selling drugs, I didn't enjoy it at all. I didn't like it. And I was still going to church. But prior to me start selling drugs, I actually was fornicating real bad. And I was going to church. And I remember my uncle asked me one Sunday to teach Sunday school. They wanted me to start teaching Sunday school class. And at that point, I said, you know what? I'm not going back to church because I refuse to teach Sunday school and be in the pulpit, knowing I'm just out here fornicating like I was doing. So I stopped going to church. And eventually, I started selling drugs when I stopped going to church. And at that point, like I said, I didn't enjoy selling drugs at all. I always felt guilty. I still ride around playing my Christian music and I was selling drugs and things, but it's always played in the back of my mind. And at one point, you know, I got stopped by the police several times. My high-speed chaser going through what I went through. Got shot once, been stabbed through all that. And, but at one point, I told God, I said, you know what? I don't want to sell drugs anymore, but I'm not going to stop selling drugs. I said, I knew my friends were going to jail for like 4 or 8 months. I said, let me get locked up for 8 months. I'll stop selling drugs and everything will be peachy again. And that's what I said to God, just like that. And a few months later, I was home one night and my front door came in, and at that moment, I knew what was happening. So I was like, man, I just stood there in my living room and they handcuffed me. I was like, you know what? It's over with. So I was like, it's over with. I wasn't upset, wasn't distraught because I knew what had happened. I left Christ and started back selling drugs again. So when I got incarcerated, I talked to my mother that night. No, the next night I talked to my mom on the phone, and she was like, it's never too late to come back home. And so I repented right there in my cell that night. I repented, got myself back together, and then even in county jail, I started teaching Bible study, help, you know, leading prayers and stuff. And from that point, I got my time. I got sentenced to 262 months in federal prison. Like you said, at the moment, it never, I knew I was gonna get that much time because they tell you what you're gonna get, but it didn't settle in until after the judge said it. I was like, okay, I got these 262 months. And in my mind, I said, I'll be back in front of you. I will get this time. I never gave up hope that I would get out of prison early. So I always say, I'll be back. I'll be back. I went to, when I was in the holdover to go back to county jail, that was the only moment I cried. I cried probably about 5 minutes. I got out the way, back to county jail. Nobody knew how much time I got because I came back in like everything was cool, which it was. I was good. I was ready to roll. And they were like, man, you got that much time? They didn't believe me. I said, yeah. I wasn't going laying down in the cell. I wasn't going to roll over in my pity because I was straight. And I went to prison. And I started serving Christ in prison. Eventually, I was teaching Bible studies. I led sermons on Sundays. I was doing Sunday sermons and everything. And that's how everything moved forward for me. But I got 262 months in, which is 21 years, 10 months. I got out early, 2015. I got out. I can't remember what law passed, but they did something under the Obama administration that allowed me to get out early.
Crack law, when they changed the crack laws? I'm sorry to cut you.
Yeah, so one of those crack laws changed. So my original early good time date was 2018. My max out date was 2020, I believe, 2021. But I got out early, 2015. But everybody there, when they found out I was getting out early, they was like, man, you always said you would get out early. You never gave up. And I did. I always knew it one day. If it was just one day early, I was going to get out early. And that's what happened for me. I was able to get out of prison early.
You know, guys, often as men, you know, we cry in silence and we do things a lot of times for validation. Between you two guys, which one of you guys actually committed these crimes to more or less impress women? Because I think a lot of times, you know, we do things to fit in, we do things to be part of with our boys, but, you know, what impact did women play a role in you actually getting involved in negative activities?
For me, it wasn't about the drugs. I don't really know why I sold drugs, to be honest with you. I didn't have to. It wasn't about women because I was always, you know, that wasn't really a major issue. But like, I don't know how to deal with people. I was always a fun individual and everything. So it never was about the drugs for me and women. It was just something I did. I don't know if it was more of a defiance or what. I just did it. Never really, and I didn't have to, man. I just got in it early. Somebody turned me on too early, and I never looked back from it.
Okay.
But I never enjoyed it though.
Right. Johnny, how did your story?
I was the opposite. I like the flaws, and growing up, all the guys that were older than me, they had the nice cars, they had the beautiful women. You know, I got 6 uncles that sold drugs before, you know, they were older than me, and I used to always see them pulling out that big knot out of their pocket, and you know, they give me $20 to go get some candy in the store, and yeah, I definitely wanted to be seen, and I wanted to be that dude in town. I wanted to be that dude in town, and it ended up biting me in the butt.
You know, we talk about peer pressure and how peer pressure more or less impacts the psyche of a lot of our boys and a lot of our men. And, you know, I think a lot of men are either in the grave or they're in jail trying to impress peers and trying to impress women. And often, you know, you guys talk about your moment of great experience. You know, when men need other male mentors to talk to, they don't have anyone to talk to as it relates to doing things that they know can have a negative impact. So when you talk about your altruistic work in the community, Johnny, what gave you the passion and the zeal to reach out to young men and boys in the community? Because your story is something of mine. You know, I didn't take the illegal route, but I did take the professional route. You know, I worked in law enforcement. You know, I went to school to be a cop. Got my first degree in law enforcement from Pitt Community College. I went to North Carolina Central, got my bachelor's in social work, went back and taught school, and got my master's from USC Chapel Hill. And I've always had a passion to see young men and boys do well. And so, you know, like Avery and I, you know, we were fortunate enough to grow up in the country, you know, and our fathers were, for the most part, there. But when you see the evolution of kids now in the inner cities, tell me what you're seeing as it relates to trends, and tell me how you feel like that's impacting some of these young men and boys in the negative way.
Well, I think all youth across the board, including myself as a young man, I was looking for another man to validate. I was looking for another man to say to me, "Good job, Johnny," or "I'm proud of you," and I didn't have that. So a lot of these, especially these young men and women, they're just looking for guidance. The bottom line, they're looking for love. And if they're not getting it at home, they're hitting them streets. They're hitting them streets, and they looking up. They looking to somebody to look up to. And if they looking up to the neighborhood drug dealer, if they looking up to the neighborhood gang leader, girls, if they looking up to the women that are exchanging sex for money, or exchanging, you know how it is. Buy me a purse, buy me some boots, buy me some red bottoms or whatever, and you can have whatever you want. These are the people these young people are looking up to. So it's up to us, especially as black and brown men, to step up to the plate and be that person that these young people look up to. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, they're looking for guidance, they're looking for love, and they're gonna find it somewhere. It's up to us to be those people that provide it for them.
You know, when you talk about the negative impacts of gang violence, when you talk about the lack of fatherlessness, and I've talked about that in my 4-part series. And if you look at the lack of fathers and families now, How do you think that played a major role in men joining your father's gang, Latin Kings? Do you feel like that played a major role? And if so, what would you more or less see as an antidote, no pun intended,
Right.
to more or less helping these guys change their course of trajectory?
Well, we got to step up. We got to step up as positive, educated men. Even you and I, Avery, our story. As soon and you already, I don't know if you spoke to kids before, but as soon as they hear our story, we got them.
Right.
We got them because they like that stuff. They like the drugs. They like the gangs. That intrigues them, and it's up to us to take that interest once we got their attention and guide them in the right direction. So it's imperative to step up to the plate and show these men and women, teach them about the system, teach them about systematic racism, teach them how jail is big business. You already know how it is, Avery. It's all about money. We went from slavery in the fields to slavery behind bars. I was the number one baker in the kitchen, Avery. I was making about $100 a month, and I was the
number one cook. I was a head cook.
You already know. And you would have rented the kitchen.
So Avery, Johnny gave his points about how kids are more or less looking out or looking for others to guide them and to show them love and adoration. And your story was not quite the same because this brother's father was one of the best high school football coaches in the state. Our football field is actually named after Coach Will Bond. He was one of the best coaches, and his motto was agile and hostile. And I've always looked up to his dad, man. As being an exemplar in the community, a solid man, and also a man that took Burt T to 2 state championships, something that's never been done before in our high school history. So you're looking at the son of a legend, and Avery and I, we were kids at a time where men were pillars and they were mentors. They were simple men, they were good men, but they were pillars and they helped a lot of young black boys stay the course. And so when you think about the dynamic between country and inner city men, I think sometimes, because they did a study about Shannon Sharp felt that the rural South saved them from being in prison. And so, Avery, give me your input based on the information that Johnny said about the need for black male mentors in leadership.
I agree, but I think about that so often about kids in the inner cities because I know guys like they say they were born into the game. I'm at a prison; they were born into the game, and prison actually helped a lot. They were so glad to come to prison some more because it gets them away from that gang thing. But it's like what they do when they get back, and I often wonder, man, I know you just can't walk away from the gang like that. So it's like what do we do for the young guys in those gangs? I often wonder about that. What can we provide for them to encourage them and to get the people that's in the game, look, let this one live. They don't want to do this, those are thoughts I always have about that. But particularly guys in the gangs and stuff. I know that's a hard life. I know it is. Getting out of it. Most of them don't have a choice getting in it. But they live at, what they gonna do? You either in the gang or you're on your own. And so I understand the trials that they go through in the city. That's one thing I always try to figure out, how do you address that for those guys in the game? On the other side, I try to impact guys at my job. I always work with a lot of young guys and stuff, and I can tell that they don't know much about life. They really don't have work ethic. They come in they think it's their company they're working for. I'm like, but they really do need people that's willing to work with them. I had a supervisor tell me the other day about a guy who was in our department. He wasn't supposed to be over there. He was like, man, he's just a young thug. And I'm like, of course it's a white supervisor. I'm like, in my mind I'm saying, why he gotta be a young thug? He got his dreads and stuff, and you don't understand him. Understand that. So he was telling me about him. I said, I take care of it. So it's more about us knowing how to deal with them, and relate to them, and just give them a chance and opportunity. A lot of those guys need some opportunities. A lot of them think they can do anything else different. They just need opportunities. We have to be willing to work with them, be patient with them, because like my son, I have a son, I wasn't there for him. He said he joined the gang early, and he told me he was mad. I wasn't home, I was gone. He was 3 years old when I left. He was mad at me, mad at the world. I wasn't there. So that's been a bridge I had to come across the last 5 years working with him. You know, we love each other to death. We call each other, but there was some friction there when I first came home. Still, we had some different friction moments, but I understood that. I wasn't mad or one bit. I understood. Right. So just a matter of being patient with you guys and showing them that there is a better way. They can make it. They can survive. They just have to want to.
You know, Johnny, you said earlier how you had the negative impact of fatherlessness in your family. You saw some things that maybe a kid your age should have never seen. And Avery, I would say that you had some of the positive effects of a father in your life. I want you guys to do a comparative analysis, compare and contrast about what negative impact from your dad still lingers in the back of your mind now. And then I want you to talk about, Avery, how important your father was in your life. Even though you took a negative path, how your father played a major role in your life.
Well,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, man, my work, I got an awesome work ethic. I mean, I got hired today. I moved up to team leader my job today. Every job I've had, you know, I don't try to impress anybody. This is what I do, and they always, I'm always recognized for what I do. I had 2 jobs. I'm always recognized. I move up quick. But I grew up on a farm, and my dad was working. You know, we worked the farm. He worked. I followed him. I was working from little age in tobacco fields, peanut fields. And my father was a worker, and I watched him work. My grandparents was there. That's enough that's missing too in family lives. You know, we had, like we said, we had a village growing up. It was a community thing. I had all my grandparents, my aunts and stuff was there. My dad really was a worker. He taught me how to work. I used to wonder. He used to make us pull weeds out the field. I'm like, I pull weeds out this field for stuff like that. Don't do this, but it's in me now. I mean,
right.
I love to work. They got to make me take breaks at work now. I just love to work. He has instilled that in me.
Okay. And just to piggyback off what Avery said, you as a son, you're always looking for validation from your father. And whatever your father is, you're going to be a reflection of your father. You're a hard worker because your father was a hard worker. Me, to get validation or to impress my dad, I would have to do what he was doing. So he was putting work in the streets. So I'm looking at him like I'm his son. I gotta live up to his standard. So I gotta put in work in the streets. And that was his mentality too. The more bigger I got as a drug dealer, the more bigger I got as a gang leader, it impressed my dad. And that's basically, thinking back, that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to impress my father. And it ended up, you know, being a negative thing. And, you know, he's spending the rest of his life in prison. I spent 9 years, 8+ years in prison. So we got to put people in front of these kids and even young men. Like, for instance, you work with young men. You being a positive role model in their lives is going to change their viewpoint and the way they think, and hopefully change their destiny. And that's what we need to do. We need to be role models for anyone we come across.
And you know, there's a correlation, guys. And you know, when I worked in law enforcement, worked in prison, there was a high correlation of guys that came from single parent homes without fathers that were called up into recidivism, or they were recidivists. So they had a high incarceration rate, but they were also repeat offenders as relates to crime. And so when you look at the black community and the brown community, more or less, you know, I think it's a macrocosm of a microcosm, meaning when you take the father out of the picture, then you have a greater, more or less manifestation of negativity that you're seeing now. And, you know, and sadly, I don't see that vestige of yesterday returning back. You know, it's really sad because I think prior to the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, you know, black families were more intact. And so when I look at the kaleidoscope now, a lot of those families are more or less not only dissipated, but a lot of these young men are looking for, like you said, leadership. They're looking for role models. They're looking for men that are going to guide them from that negative path. And so I consider you guys to be exemplars for doing some of the things you all are doing, because it's greatly needed.
Right. Well, like you said, it's the government, the system has been strategic in breaking up the family home. I mean, I think it was 1956 when they started Section 8 with women. one of the things for Section 8, for you to be approved for Section 8, is you couldn't have a man living in the house.
Right.
So now you're giving a woman a choice: $50 a month rent, or have my man in the house. So, and then once we got the man out of the house, there's no jobs for us. So what are we doing? They're kicking us out of the house. We in the street now, trying to survive. What are we doing? We selling drugs. If we can't make it in life, we start self-medicating. That's when, our fathers become addicts. Our family members become addicts. So it's a trickle-down effect. And now we're dealing with the ramifications of decades of the family structure not being together.
And I think another greater nemesis in the Black community is that we tend to more or less glorify what I call swag culture. When you talked about the glorification of flossing, it's funny you know what floss, because that's what we called it back in high school.
Show my age a little bit.
I used to call it smoothing and reproving. But when you think about the swag culture now, where sadly some of our women they glorify the bad boy over quality men. What do you think is going to be the long-term impact of that negative mindset that we're seeing in our community? And then also, when you more or less collaborated, and this is a loaded question, but when you collaborated with men in prison, what was their story as it relates to more or less impressing those in their neighborhoods?
Want that one, Avery?
Long-term effects. Go back a second. Everything I always call demand. Everything the man does is strategic. Everything they plan, like they know when they're gonna build houses 10 years from now, when they're gonna build them, man. They know when they're gonna build highway projects. Everything they do is set up for the long haul. They know what they're gonna do 10, 15, 20 years from now. Even if they're not there, they have a plan in place. So as he said earlier with the Section 8 thing, all that was laid out as a plan. They knew what they wanted to do with us. The drug laws they have in place right now, all that was set up as a plan. They saw the long haul of it, what it's going to do, how it's going to support their businesses and things. So everything they do is a plan. We have to see that, recognize that. We as Black people don't have a plan. We don't know how to counterattack the plan they have for us. So we have to come up with our own plans. The Bible speaks about vision. Where there's no vision, the people perish. We don't have our own vision, a positive vision, then we're going to continue to fall into the traps they have for us in the Section 8 things like that. So that's something hard to defeat. I think we have to do a better job of educating our young men and women on sex, having protected sex. They have to see the ramifications of having a child that they don't see it right now. A lot of girls, they want a baby now. They want to be loved. That's why a lot of girls got dogs and pets. They want something to love as they own. So now they have children, but they don't look down the long haul, the long road, what's going to take place. How this is going to affect the child life? What's your vision for this child when you have this child? What's your plan for this child? So we have to educate our young people on that a lot, on premarital sex. If you're going to have it, yeah, but what about the children? They got to have the vision and plan for that. Guys in prison, there's either two things in prison. Prison did for me, and I know the guys I dealt with. You going out, the same person you came in, thinking you're smarter than when you went in, doing the same thing, or you'll come out and change, man. There's those two options. That's what it is. Most guys go out thinking they're smarter than they've been in, they met other guys, they collaborated, figured they could do this different, but that's why they keep coming back. They haven't changed. If you don't have a changed mindset going out, then you're going to be going back as a recidivism. I know a lot of guys that don't go back. I think the percentage of people that go back that don't go back is just great. The last prison I was in, almost everybody I was there with, none of them, we've been out over 5 years, one or two went back. But for the most part, I talk to everybody still. We still out here doing positive things. It's a mindset. What you want to do when you get out. What you want to do with your life. Unpack that question some more.
Man, my brain is spinning.
What did you put in that?
So what I was asking you, Avery, and I was asking Johnny the same thing. Guys a lot of time have barbershop talk. So when you guys were in prison, the guys say, you know what, man, I gave 20 years of my life, man, trying to impress a woman. Because some men are in the grave right now because they're trying to impress, the chick with the big butt in his mouth. And what I'm asking you guys from discussion, were there guys in prison that more or less articulated that they got themselves in this quagmire because they were trying to more or less impress women? That was the question.
overall,
Not you. Not you.
overall, most people that sell drugs, if you don't start out doing it, it eventually, most guys, it eventually gets to that. It's just the nature of the game. Once they know you sell drugs, they're gonna come, and you're gonna go along with the flow. So I'm gonna say 90% of people didn't start out for the flaws, but eventually that's what it was all about. Most of us don't have a business plan. We don't have a vision. We just gonna sell drugs and ride it as we ride. Most of us don't have that plan. We sell this much, get this going, open a business and go. We don't have a vision. We just rolling with the flow. Most of us, 90%, I'm gonna say that, was doing it because of that.
Yeah, I agree. Probably 9 out of 10 dudes I was incarcerated with, locked up with, had very similar stories that I had. They, you know, and it's funny because at the beginning, you get caught up in the moment and you start showing each other pictures. You know what I mean? This is me on the block with all the chains on, or these are the cars that I had. And then after a couple years in prison, you realize all that stuff don't mean nothing. And the pictures start collecting dust. And like the Bible says, we need to renew our minds. If we don't renew our minds and the way we think, we're going to end up trapped in that same cycle, coming in and out of jail probably the rest of our lives.
You're correct, and I think that more or less goes back to what Ted Santos talked about in a couple of my episodes. He talked about how fathers give their sons power. When you look at it from the lens of theology, Jesus said in the book of John that I've glorified the Father, and the Father has glorified me. And there was a transfer of power as it relates to dominion, as it relates to righteousness. And you talked about your dad, how you looked up to your father, even though his works were negative, he left a negative imprint on your psyche. And so I say this with all sincerity: until men get back into homes, we could talk about political malfeasance, we could talk about mass incarceration, we can talk about the current political pundits that we have now in our communities. Until men get back in their homes and be men in their homes,
right,
instead of being puppets and yes men, we're going to still have these issues that are more or less going on. Men were called to be priests in their home, to set examples for their sons, and to love their wives, but at the same time be the leaders in those homes.
Right.
But see, now unfortunately, you got a negative input where you got some of our sisters, not all, are trying to lead their men, and it's causing a lot of issues in the families because boys look to their dads for a source of power. And so, Black people coming out of slavery were more progressive than they are now. But the thing that we had back then, in my greatest opinion, is that we had an abiding faith in God. We lived out the dictates of Christ, and we had masculine men that said what they meant and meant what they said. Avery, when we were in high school, we used to say word is bond. We used to say word is bond. And nowadays, men don't stand on principles. They just go with the flow. And so when you guys think about the negative impacts of mass incarceration, there was a book that a colleague of mine gave me. I haven't really had a chance to read all of it, but it was more or less spearheaded by the Clinton administration, and also, unfortunately, this current political candidate there, Joe Biden. And so when you guys talk about mass incarceration and the negative impacts that it had on your psyche and also in the community, how do you feel like that's more or less kept the Black community down? Because here's the thing. A lot of people say, well, you committed the crime, but we're not talking about that. We know you committed the crime. We know you guys did things that were wrong. But do you feel like that the penalty did not justify the crime?
But that goes back to them having a plan in the system. They set a plan in place for us to get a lot of time to run their it's a lot of business work out of prisons, man. Major companies and corporations are funded through the prisons. Unicorn,
Bob Barker.
It's a lot of companies. So that's the plan. That's why I keep trying to get people to understand. They give us a lot of time to keep us running their facilities. That's what it's about. Yep. It's just many white people that does cocaine and stuff that's Black. But that's always been the disparity there. You can't have crack about cocaine. But you'll never see mass. They had drug busts. You don't see massive white people going to jail, getting incarcerated. Right. The ones that do get incarcerated, very few fall through the cracks. They don't get that much time.
Right.
The system was designed for them. The system was designed for us. Bottom line. That's what the problem is with the mass incarceration. It's about their plan to keep their money running through the system.
Right.
And that's what I need to hear. I can just talk about. What are y'all going to do about this system, y'all? And they made some adjustments to it, but nobody is saying anything about doing anything about this. The length of time they're getting overall, that the system needs to be overhauled, especially the drug laws in particular. They need to be overhauled completely.
Right. Yeah, I agree with Avery. I mean, we can go all the way back to Reagan with Reaganomics. I actually met, I don't know if y'all heard of Rick Ross, not the rapper, the real Rick Ross from California. Yeah. I actually got to spend a day with him, and he was telling me how they was flooding the streets with drugs and guns, and there wasn't no poppy seed crops or no, coca leaf crops in the hood or fully automatic weapons in the hood. They purposely flooded the streets with drugs and guns so that we could sell them and kill each other and end up in jail. And then, like you said, Avery, the laws, you can have a Caucasian person get caught with a gram of coke. You can get me or Avery get caught with a gram of coke. That Caucasian person is gonna get offered probation, rehab, blah blah blah, and we gonna get time. They're gonna lock us up and throw away the key for the same exact charge. And it's all because they want to fill up these jails with black and brown men so that they can get cheap labor. And it's crazy, it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. They just want us, like Avery said, cheap labor, and they've been doing it for decades now.
When you guys hear terms like a super predator, because I worked in prison once again, I was a CO, and I was used as the big bouncer, the big 6'5" black bouncer, and a lot of times even back then, they didn't want to use you for your intellect, they want to use you for your size. So, of course, with that Leo fire, I was a rebel because my mouth always get me in trouble.
Right.
But when you think about the negative images, because it's funny, y'all make some very poignant points, because when you think about like crystal meth is more or less romanticized as it relates to some of our white Caucasian friends. But when black people on crack, they were demonized. Right. And so I think what you guys say more or less carries a lot of weight. When I hear some of these political candidates say super predator, or they were this and they were that, or we lock them up, and when I see the negative demonification of black men, more or less, did you guys ever lose hope as being black and brown men because of that negative imprint that you felt like certain pundits had about you guys when you guys were incarcerated?
No. If anything, as I began to understand how the system worked, as I began to understand that, it's just basically a plot against us since they signed the Constitution, that actually gave me motivation and power to rise above that. And not only rise above it, but to pass the wisdom that I was imparting on myself and imparting to other black and brown men and women, to let them know that you can rise above the system, because we don't have any choice. We're either going to get trapped in it or understand it, because I tell people all the time, life isn't checkers, it's chess. So we need to educate ourselves on how the system works and stay 4 steps ahead of our oppressors at all times.
We talked about coping, and some people use drinking, alcohol, sex, even murder as a form of coping. How did you guys cope in prison? Because I remember when I worked in prison, I had a young man killed himself. He couldn't deal with having 20 years. How did you guys cope, and what part did Christ play a role in your coping experience?
For me, everything. Everything for me. I mean, all day, every day. I mean, I can't count how many times I read the Bible from front to back. That was all I did. Man, I spent my time in the chapel, the scriptures, everything.
Was you in the choir? Avery?
Yeah, for a while, yeah. I couldn't sing a lick though, but I was there.
Yeah, like Avery said, I delved into that word. I prayed every day. I attended church. I ministered to other inmates, and inmates ministered to me. And just kept God first. And to this day, I still keep God first. It says in the Word of God, you seek the kingdom of God first, and everything else will be added on to you. So I kept that in mind. Count all things joy. I struggled with that for a while. How can I count all things joy when I'm locked in this cell every day? But then I began to understand that God's glory will be revealed through my testimony once I got through this. So that's what I look forward to. I said, I'm gonna get through this so I can give God glory when I give my testimony.
There was a movie called New Jack City back in the 90s, I think. And Pookie used to say, it's calling me, it's calling me. And so, how do you guys deal with the streets calling you back? I'm sure you've been solicited since you've been out of prison. I'm sure there have been temptations, but how do you guys stay grounded? And have you guys more or less made a pact with God to say, Lord, if you got me out of this situation, even though I'm tempted, because it's not a sin to be tempted, I'm not going back to that negative state of mind again. How have you guys dealt with that?
For me, it's no temptation. There's no temptation whatsoever. First of all, I'm not in the streets like that hanging out. I'm married now, so my hangouts are totally different. Everything I do is totally different now. So there's no I've been in the neighborhood. I've seen some of the people from down the way. There's no mention of it. They know I ain't about that life at all whatsoever. There's no temptation. It don't even cross my mind. I don't have an issue with that at all. There's no temptation for me.
When I first came home, there was a couple of times where I was hard on. I came home with nothing. My first job was Kentucky Fried Chicken. A grown man frying chicken in the back. And then my second job was McDonald's. So there was a few times when at the beginning where I was like, man, I could go grab this and come up. But then I would see people getting caught. I would think I wouldn't jump on it real quick, and I would think about it. And by the time I thought about it, I would find out that the dude that was tempting me was telling or something, and then I'll be like, "Whoo," you know what I mean? Like that was a setup. So at the beginning, it was a little tempting, but then, as I've see, and this is something I tell kids: the game don't change, but the product does. So basically, we was in a way we had our own businesses. Avery, we was entrepreneurs, but we were doing it illegally. So I tell these young people to take that same passion, take that same motivation, and I steer them in the right direction, because business is just supply and demand. That's what we were doing. We were supplying, they needed the drugs and we supplied it. So business is supply and demand. So I tell young people, business is two things. You're either offering a service or you're offering a product. So figure out what your product is going to be, figure out what your service is going to be, and I will help you set up a business where you could flourish and do something that you're passionate about and never worry about going to jail. So when I realized that and, started just making moves legally, I said, man, I ain't never going to sell drugs again. There's too many ways to make money legally. It's the risk is not worth it. It's not.
Right. I totally agree. When you guys look at, being incarcerated and, dealing with, different forms of depression and dealing with despair, how did this impact your families, and what were their concerns when you guys were in prison?
I think that impacts everybody. For me, I had never seen my brother cry before. The first time I saw him cry was I was in jail, and that just struck me to my heart. Right. It was a big impact on my family. That's what's important. I think a lot of guys miss to go to prison. If y'all got people that's in prison, go see your family. It means so much to guys when they get visits, because guys have bad mood swings in prisons, because you never know what goes on in their family life from day to day, what phone call they got, what letter they got, relationships breaking up. But for me, man, family was everything. It was everything. And I had a good support system. Coming out of prison, my family was there for me. And that's why my transition was it was like I never left. Everything looked a little different, but I stepped right up to my family. Everybody was there. So family is good. Having that strong support system is there.
Yeah, I gotta say the same thing for mine. I had a beautiful support system.
Faith is before you. Choose wisely.